Hi everyone, this is Valerie Comer and I'm here to share with you the first scene of my novella, Sown in Love, which is a garden-grown romance and it's part of the multi-author Arcadia Valley contemporary romance series. So, Sown in Love introduces the town of Arcadia Valley and introduces the three follow-up novels in the series, which are Sprouts of Love, Rooted in Love, and Harvest of Love. So I would just like to share with you the first scene of the story, Sown in Love. Chapter 1. No, I don't think so. Joanna Krause pressed both hands on the boardroom table and stared at the infuriating man at the other end. No? And why not? I don't think that's what my grandfather has in mind. Why didn't the elderly Mr. Akers come and speak to the committee himself? He was only old, not dead. He didn't always make sense, they said, but the message had to be clearer than coming through a third party. Warning bells rang. Hadn't Pierce used his dad's name to stall the deal she'd put together for him? She lifted her chin and met Grady Akers' dazzling blue eyes. Why don't you explain what your grandfather wants instead of making me guess? This proposal wasn't going to fall through like this. Not on her watch. Not again. Early spring sunshine angled in through the tall, narrow windows of the Grace Fellowship boardroom. Flames flickered in the gas fireplace. The other three committee members' heads swung back and forth as though watching a table tennis match. Miss Krause, Grady flashed a winsome smile. As I mentioned in my initial request, he wants the property to be used for something that benefits the church and the community. While bulldozing the structures and building a row of townhouses for low-income housing would definitely assist those who live in them, Granddad would prefer an option that is of lower cost and wider benefit. Of course, the Akers family dangled the carrot of additional funding in front of Grace Fellowship. No one could blame Joanna for thinking big. All she needed was one or two solid, completed deals in her CV to set her consulting business on the right track again. This deal, for her brother's church, and hers since she'd moved, should have been a slam dunk. She glanced at the monitor displaying the presentation on housing she'd been arrowing through. I'm sorry, Mr. Akers, it would be most helpful if you and your grandfather offered concrete parameters before I spend 2 more weeks of my life honing another proposal for you to shoot down. Granted, she'd been rather distracted by the move to Arcadia Valley at the same time, but a look at the town demographics had showed her that affordable housing was a definite need. His grin, surrounded by a neatly trimmed beard and mustache, did not waver. Dark, wavy hair brushed the collar of his blue and white striped shirt, accenting his eyes. Joanna had once had a weakness for blue eyes, but not anymore. If the man thought she'd succumb just because he smiled, he had another think coming. Remember Pierce, he had a great smile too. She tipped her head and looked at Grady with her eyebrows raised. He rested his elbows on the table. Maybe we should go for lunch and do some brainstorming. Mrs. Panchetta smirked. Heat crept up Joanna's cheeks. Or you could send me an email. Or we could Skype. Mr. Akers, Grady. Mr. Akers, please send me an email with any additional information you may have that might help me to reach some actual possibilities. His brows rose above those twinkling eyes. And your email address is? On the report in front of you. He glanced down, then nodded. So I see. You will definitely be hearing from me soon. Was that a threat or a promise? The committee chair looked from one to the other. If I may interject. Joanna took a deep breath. Go ahead. Mr. Wattenberg, isn't it? I've known Clarence all my life. He served Grace Fellowship well as a board member and Sunday school teacher for decades. He has always been a member in good standing. He may be 89 now, but his mind is still sharp. Is it not, Grady? Grady rubbed his temples and looked down. Most of the time. Huh. The man had a soft spot? Then there's no time to lose. Mr. Wattenberg turned to Joanna. I see no point in the committee continuing to convene until you've come up with a plan that Clarence approves of. Grady has a good point. Why don't you accept his lunch invitation? She would not look at Grady. She would not. And furthermore, I think the two of you should go visit Clarence together. Let's not play the guessing game of what Clarence will want and what he won't want. Catch him on a good day and ask him. Give him your thoughts and let him respond. Mr. Wattenberg glanced at his watch. I have another meeting shortly. Could we spend some more time in prayer before you leave? Mr. Marshall asked. We need God's guidance on this matter. Of course. Mr. Wattenberg nodded, sinking back into his chair. Go ahead, and I'll close. So, her presentation was over before she'd had time to get into the details. Just like that. She reached over and flipped her laptop shut as Mr. Marshall began a measured prayer to the good Lord above. It wasn't that she wanted to waste time fleshing out ideas only to be shot down in 5 minutes. It was that she didn't want to spend time with Grady Akers. He was flirting, using his charm to get in her good graces so he could... No, she wouldn't let him. She'd left Salt Lake City to get away from Pierce, not to meet another man equally as full of himself. She'd moved her consulting business to this small Idaho town because her brother needed help with the boys. The church had hired her to create a viable plan for a piece of land and had no right to push her into going for lunch with this man. Conscience bit. Not that she'd never gone for lunch with clients before. It was part of doing business. She'd even survived handsome, single, male clients before. So what made this time different? Grady was more than the sum of those parts. He was hot, sizzling hot. He made more than her blood boil. She glanced down the table at him, past the board members with their bowed heads. His grin widened, and his eyes gleamed with amusement. Joanna scrunched her eyes shut. Why wasn't he focusing? Why wasn't she? Mr. Marshall intoned the end of his prayer, and Mrs. Ponchetta began an impassioned plea for God's guidance. As though they hadn't all been praying for that these past 2 weeks. At least Joanna knew she had. Who knew what Grady Akers prayed for? She didn't even want to guess. So that was the first scene in Sown in Love, and it's available on Amazon for sale or for borrowing in Kindle Unlimited at the time of this recording, which is the summer of 2021. I hope that it was intriguing and that you would like to pick it up. Thanks very much. Have a great day.